All right, hello. I go by Larbird33 on Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram. So this is my third episode of this project where I call up strangers and talk to them about the Celtics. My first episode, I confronted my catfish, Scott, a man of mystery who I finally called after 11 years of internet friendship. Episode 2, I dialed up the infamous Bill Hondo Bird Truth JB, tried to figure out if he was really a troll, and also tried to get to the bottom of whether or not we were the same person. Look, props to Bill Hondo. I know that most people on Reddit just wouldn't even give it a chance, but honestly, I thought he came across pretty great, and it takes some balls to put yourself out there like that, so thanks again, Bill. This one, look, in this episode, someone called me a coward for only interviewing people who agree with me, so I'm calling your bluff, all right? Like, nobody on the internet hates me more than Eddie20 from the Celticsblog forums. If you ask anyone there, they'll tell you how insufferable it was to just see us arguing with each other every day for like multiple years. I think there was once a thread comparing Jaylen Brown to Dario Saric that got so violent that like half the forum got temporary suspensions because of it. He's also like sent me personal messages that like refer to me as, here's a quote, I'm a clown incapable of properly assessing my own level of unparalleled stupidity. And I think it actually got a lot worse from that. But I gotta be honest, look here, I'm kind of dreading this one. There's a decent chance this ends up with me just crying and deleting my YouTube channel, but I'm gonna give it a shot, you know. Thanks again to anyone out there who sent their positive comments and feedback on the first couple of episodes. If you'd like to see me keep doing these, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's a big deal. And I'm happy to announce that based on the success of my first 2 episodes, I have my first official sponsor. That's right. I'm super excited. Let's go to the reads. Don't pay extra for overly expensive dribble gloves. Use Larbird33's used grocery bags. I've been using used grocery bags myself, and I can attest they take away your grip. Use the promo code LB33 to get $1 off your first order. All right, yeah, that shit's ridiculous. Let's call up Eddie20.
Bird, you got me?
Yeah, man. How you doing?
What's up, brother? How are you?
All right, man. Eddie20.
Eddie20, LB33, the legend.
My nemesis. Which one of us is Batman and which one of us is a Joker?
Yeah, I think we know the obvious answer on that one.
So you admit that when I stopped posting on Celticsblog, part of you kind of missed me and wanted me to come back and make it interesting for you.
Yeah, pretty much, man. I don't have a arch rival there. You're the man. We go at it back and forth because you had some wild ideas.
So I've done a couple of these episodes, and I got like one comment that was saying I was kind of a wuss because I wasn't interviewing anyone that disagreed with me on anything. So I figured I might as well have you on, man. Like we spent 4 years just kind of arguing back and forth, usually about the Sixers, and seemed like we took an opposite stance on everything, you know, and I think it got, you know, every once in a while got a little vicious. I think one time you told me I needed to be medicated. So here's your opportunity, you know, just take a well,
that's right. I did tell you that.
Yeah, you did. So just take a moment, you know, tell my maybe 3 or 4 listeners that I have out there, just in broad strokes, why I suck and why they shouldn't listen to my podcast.
No, actually, I think you're very interesting. That's why we had like the whole banter back and forth. Some of your ideas were really out of left field. Like a lot of the Sixers stuff, I still don't believe they went about it the right way.
I want to definitely talk about Philly, but let's like work up to it because I think we have a lot to talk about with the Sixers. Actually, I'm curious, like where are you from? Because you have an interesting kind of accent.
Miami, man.
Oh, you're from Miami. Okay, so it's interesting. I've done 3 of these. I haven't yet spoken to anyone who actually lives in like Boston, you know, it's all outside of the region.
Scott doesn't live there?
Oh, Scott says he lives in North Carolina. He's probably, based on his accent, I'm assuming he's originally from there, but he says he lives in North Carolina. Of course, I don't know anything about that guy. He could be lying to me. So, So how'd you get into the Celtics? Are you from Miami originally?
I started watching the Celtics like back in '85, man. I was like 7. So there was the Heat didn't even exist. They weren't even an idea.
Sure.
So yeah, I just started rooting them on, and I didn't waver. They formed the Heat. The Heat sucked, and I continued following the Celtics. How about you, man? You're from Seattle.
Well, yeah,
right?
My family's originally from Massachusetts, so I have a bunch of family in Lynn and Salem. I was actually born in Salem. But I lived in Florida for a little bit. I actually spent 7 years in like Fort Lauderdale. So my first game I ever went to was actually a Miami Heat game versus the Celtics. So, but I grew up a huge Celtic fan. My dad was obsessed with it, and obviously Larry Bird.
You went to the old arena, right? The Miami Arena?
Yeah, the old Miami Arena. I think that's where I probably saw my first concert too. We went and saw Aerosmith or something when I was like 7. But
yeah, okay. Hey, your boy, by the way, is playing right now. Biyombo, he got the start, believe it or not.
Biyombo. We'll talk about Biyombo too. I think, you know, this is a good place to start. So I think a lot of our disagreements, it kind of stems from maybe like a fundamental difference of opinion or at least a misunderstanding about player development. And I think it's relevant when we're talking about guys like Tatum now and Jaylen Brown, Rozier, and Williams. We have all these guys who are developing. How did you generally feel about Chad Ford's annual draft tier article?
No, I actually liked it. I thought he had a lot of insight, especially all the info he had with like scouts and what they're saying about the players. Obviously, everything is just a rough guide, and obviously we've gone back and you look back at his history, and some of it is obviously hit or miss, but it's okay. I mean, I think you took it a little bit as the be all end all of drafting. I forgot the players, but I know that sometimes, like, let's say Jaylen Brown, you'd be like, oh, he's a tier 3. See, we got food this year.
So let me explain it for anyone who's listening who doesn't actually know what these are. So Chad Ford, actually, he took a bunch of flack for, he had his mock drafts that were on ESPN Insider, and apparently over the years those were modified. But putting that aside, because he's denied that he actually had any involvement in updating those, the draft tier thing was something that he would come out with a couple days before the draft. And the general premise, and I don't know if he was lying or not, you know, he could have just been full of shit, but the general premise was that he would talk to a bunch of scouts and GMs a couple days before the draft. And because every draft is different, where sometimes there's a draft like 2003 where you have LeBron and Melo and, you know, all these top talent, and then you have a draft like 2000 where it's someone like Marcus Pfizer or something. The idea is that every draft has different tiers of talent. So there might be a year where there's going to be a tier 1, which is like a potential superstar, someone who should end up becoming a superstar in the league. Tier 2 he would have as a potential star. Tier 3 would be a potential NBA starter. And there were years like 2013 where he didn't have a single player in tier 1 or tier 2. So, I mean, I generally like the idea because I don't really follow college basketball. I don't know. Are you a big college basketball fan?
Not as much as the NBA. Like, I'm watching it. I tend to watch it when we have a lot of picks. So this year I'm gonna have to dive in there. I start diving in closer to March Madness, though, man. But this year it's weird because there's a lot of injuries. I don't know if you're aware, but Bobo went down and Porter's gone. So
right.
I mean, a lot of guys that we might select aren't even playing right now.
So the reason I liked his kind of tier thing is because I do think that, you know, a lot of people will say every draft they hype up some player as the next big thing, but it's not really true, because if you think about a year like 2013, there wasn't really a consensus top guy, which is how a guy like Anthony Bennett ends up going number 1. Now we look at that draft in retrospect and we know that every year there's guys who exceed expectation and they disappoint. And, you know, in 2013, it was Giannis, of course. And that was something that Scott brought up in episode 1, where he went like 15th. And then there's other years where a guy like Wiggins, who is considered the consensus top dude, ends up completely disappointing. And he's, you know, he's averaging 20 points, but he kind of stinks. So I always thought that was a good starting point, but I didn't generally think that it was like a be-all, end-all. I didn't think that because he had someone in tier 1 means that he's definitely going to get there. You have to assume there's going to be busts, and you got to assume that some guys aren't going to live up to their ceiling. But I guess a question I have for you is the whole concept of like a ceiling. Do you think that's completely nonsense, or do you think there's actually something to that?
No, I absolutely think there's like a guy like Embiid. I mean, injuries notwithstanding, I mean, his ceiling is endless, just like Wiggins. But the problem with Wiggins is his heart. He just doesn't play with any effort. I mean, I think his rebounds a game is like 3 or 4, something like that. He gets no steals, no blocks. He doesn't really defend if you watch him. People beat him off the dribble at will. All he cares about is his stats, his numbers, his scoring. I mean, so that guy doesn't have the drive. I think there's a lot of Jeff Green, who you like to bring up with Brown, but there's a lot of Green in Wiggins.
I think that's a fair assessment. I do think that he's one of those guys that doesn't have the drive. But you would say that when he first came out, that you could see the tools that they were talking about when they said that he had potential superstar ceiling.
Hey, what did Ford have Wiggins and Embiid and Parker rank?
Let me take a look at that real quick. Sorry, I always get a little bit nervous when I do these. It's cool to hear you're actually, you know, a nice dude and not just ripping into me.
God damn it, Bird, hurry up, man.
So he did the tiers from the years 2009 to 2017, and the guys that he had that he claimed were tier 1 were Blake Griffin, John Wall, Anthony Davis, Andrew Wiggins, Joel Embiid, and Jabari Parker. So obviously Parker had a bunch of injuries, didn't live up to his potential, as I think people thought he was going to be the next Melo. Offensively great, defensively terrible. But with a guy like Wiggins, do you think it was just bullshit? Like, do you think he just didn't live up to his ceiling?
I just think it's that effort. I mean, if he put it all together, I think that was the knock on him, the lack of competitive fire he had. And it's just, he's just proved all the naysayers correct, and he has no fire. I think that's what all the issue. Well, Jimmy Butler now has issues in Philly, but all the issues probably stem more from Wiggins than they do from Towns.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then like on the concept of this tier thing, I guess one of my questions for you is, you said in a message to me, you said that you had Jaylen Brown's ceiling was similar to that of Derrick Jones Jr. I want you to kind of explain that one, because honestly, I hadn't even really heard much about Derrick Jones Jr.
Have you seen Derrick Jones play or no?
Only a little bit. And I imagine you probably see him a little bit more, being that you're in Miami, right?
Actually, I hate to watch the Heat, but playing like, DraftKings and stuff like that, you tend to watch like different players across the league. So Derrick Jones, man, he's been rising. He's getting better. Just, I kind of like related similar to like the way they develop players like Josh Richardson, Tyler Johnson, even before back in the day. Remember Ike Austin? They just seem to get these players. And I mean, Pat Riley did it before. If you think about it, remember with Anthony Mason, John Starks, etc.
Yep.
So they seem to get these players and mold them. And Derrick Jones is a guy that's really excelling. Towns went off against the Heat, but if you actually watch the game, he was doing a very good job fronting him. Towns didn't start going off against the Heat until they started putting Bam, Whiteside. He destroyed Whiteside, and Olynyk. I mean, obviously, you could imagine. But Jones was doing a very good job. He's athletic as they come. They're about the same age. He's developing as a three-point shooter. So what I'm saying is, like, in 5 years, it wouldn't be surprising to me if Jones surpasses Brown as a player. Just like, I mean, think about it. 3 years ago, if anybody would say, okay, Josh Richardson versus Marcus Smart, oh, no way, it's going to be Marcus Smart. But, fast forward, and Josh Richardson is right there with him as a player.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get what you're saying. I think people are going to hear that and think it's one of the most flaming hot takes you could possibly have, which is that Derrick Jones Jr. will end up potentially surpassing Brown. But I get what you're saying. I get what you mean when you're talking about his, his physical attributes, his athleticism, and his age. He's, a little bit younger than Jaylen. I see right now, I'm just looking at his stats because I haven't watched him that much. He's shooting 38% from three this season compared to Brown. He's shooting 29%. Like, it wouldn't be shocking if a guy like that ended up surpassing Brown. I mean, it's probably a huge long shot, but it's possible. Another guy on the Heat, let's just talk about...
well, hold on. Back to Jones. I think you also have to factor in the culture. If he was in, I don't know, Phoenix, let's say, he might rot. If he were somewhere else, he wouldn't have the same type of ceiling. The fact that he's in Miami and they're building him up, I think is gonna pay dividend. At the other end of the spectrum, they have Winslow. So Winslow, they really hadn't developed him, but I think they were playing him out of position. Yep. I think he's much better when he's got the ball in his hands, which is what he was doing in Duke.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up, is Justice Winslow. He's the same age as Jaylen Brown. He's having a pretty solid season, shooting 37% from three. He's averaging 11.6 points. He had kind of a rough start to his career, but I mean, if we're looking at how good Jaylen Brown can be in 5 or 10 years, whatever, compared to a guy like Winslow still has a lot of potential. He was one of those guys that when he came out, they thought he was like a tier 2 prospect that had the potential to become an all-star. So, it wouldn't be crazy if 3 years from now he ends up reaching that ceiling. So that kind of brings me to my next thing. So this was a post that was on Reddit 2 years ago, and it was probably one of my favorite posts I've ever seen anyone make on the Celtic subreddit, from this guy named Chris Mills Contract. It got very little attention, maybe 15 upvotes, but he brought up this idea that I really liked, where he's saying that the way we look at prospects and think about their ceilings kind of needs a modifier. So he basically put it up like this. He's like, let's consider it as there's 10 levels of players. There's someone who can potentially become a generational talent. That's like the guys that are amazing, like LeBron, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, like the once-in-a-generation type of talent. There's the next step down, which is the elite talent. And those are guys that will end up being MVP candidates, guys like Kevin Garnett, guys like James Harden, Dirk Nowitzki, for example. Then the step below that, perennial all-stars. That's guys like Pierce, Gary Payton, guys who don't necessarily end up being an all-NBA first-teamer, but end up being great. So he had this whole kind of list of, it's going to be confusing, but 10 tiers, generational talent, elite talent, perennial all-star, fringe star. And he says when you look at a prospect, you kind of look at what their ceiling might be, but you need a modifier. And this is the part that I thought was great. And the modifier is a little bit further. If you scroll down, he's like an A, which is that he's all but guaranteed to reach that potential, 100% likeliness, which is super unlikely, right? B, right. He should reach that potential, but he could drop a tier. You know, maybe you think that he's got elite talent potential, but it's a possibility he's only going to end up being a perennial all-star. C, he may reach that potential, but could drop 2 tiers. You know, he's shown some flashes, but ultimately is not likely to reach that potential. And then D, unlikely to reach that potential, could drop 3 tiers. So I love this because if you think about a guy like Gerald Green, who when he came out, people were like, you know, best case scenario, because of the fact he can jump and shoot, maybe he ends up being an all-star. But I would say the modifier on that is that D, he's unlikely to reach that potential. You know, he's probably going to drop from all-star to a solid starter at best, or maybe even a rotation player. I like that a lot because if I look at our roster right now, and people talk about how Jaylen Brown has amazing potential, and they talk about how Jayson Tatum has amazing potential, I think you need that modifier. So I would say that right now, personally, and I want to hear what you have to say about it, but personally, I would say that Jayson Tatum, I have such huge hopes for this kid. I think he's just like physically, his length, his size, his shooting ability, his moves. I think he'd put his ceiling at probably an elite talent level, MVP candidate someday. But I don't think that it's a guarantee, right? So I would say the modifier on him is probably going to be a B. I think he should reach that potential. I really do, but it's most likely he's going to end up being a perennial all-star. You could talk me into it being a C. He could drop all the way to all-star. When I look at Jaylen Brown, I would say that best case scenario, he's probably an all-star. Probably an all-star. I think level 4. But I don't know how likely it is. I think it could be a C. It could drop a couple tiers. It could go down to just being a plus starter. So how would you rank some of our young guys on that scale?
Well, if you think about Brown, I mean, the issue I have with Brown is his overall feel. Unless he's scoring the ball, shooting the ball within the flow of the offense, obviously he's playing great, you know, for the most part. He's engaged. But if he's not, if he's a corner shooter and he's relegated to like playing off the ball, his entire game seems to suffer. Like defensively, he loves going for fakes. I hate. If you think about it on paper, he should be like the perfect guy to like cover Redick, but he's not. He gets lost on screens, and Redick will pump fake him, and you know it's a disaster. But then you have somebody like Joe Ingles who took Redick out a couple of years ago in the playoffs, right? Because it's just the intelligence, the IQ. I want Brown to develop. I do think his handles have gotten better. Before he was pretty atrocious. As for Tatum, yeah, I agree with you. He's got all the tools. My issue right now with Tatum is that there's a lot less catch and shoots. If you notice, he's putting the ball down a lot, that pump fake, and then he's always going left. Pump fake left. Like there's no pump fake right, or there's really few catch and shoot. So I want to see him like start developing and mixing up aspects of his game. I don't know if you've caught that, but it's always like that pump fake going to the left.
It definitely seems like he's experimenting a little bit and trying different things, but yeah, there's aspects he definitely needs to improve. So you kind of agree with me that Tatum probably elite talent level, but maybe like a B modifier. He could drop a tier. And for your best case scenario, you're seeing Brown as, you still think he has potential to be an all-star?
I do, because he's got all the physical tools.
And then like, how likely do you think that is? Like, what would you put the modifier as? Would you say that's a C, he could drop 2 tiers, unlikely, not worth, you know, where would you put that?
I don't think he'd be an all-star on our team. Okay. I mean, yeah, I think there's too many mouths to feed. But if he goes to a team that he's like the focal point of the offense, for sure, I think he has all-star potential, and the likelihood increases tremendously. Just like Rozier. Rozier's a player with a lot of talent. He just cannot play limited minutes. That's just not suited for him.
Yep, I agree with you there too. I think that Rozier, I would probably put his ceiling, it's like best case scenario as a fringe all-star, probably a level 5 on this scale. And then I would say that probably a C modifier. It could end up that he just ends up being a solid starter.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. He needs minutes. He's not a guy that's going to like do well playing limited minutes. He's not. He needs to establish a rhythm, and he forces a lot of shots when he's playing limited minutes because he feels that he needs to like get things going. So yeah, he's pretty frustrating playing limited minutes. As a starter, as a spot starter, you love him. But off the bench, he drives me nuts.
So I want to talk a little bit about kind of that. So how your environment, how the kind of opportunities you have in the league impact how a player develops. So, Malcolm Gladwell has that book Outliers, which I've never actually read. I'm sure you probably heard of it though. The whole 10,000 hour rule, where to master anything, you need 10,000 hours of practice at that skill. And I think, obviously, if you're trying to become a great player, you need the reps. You need to have lots of practice. But beyond that, you need the environmental circumstances, like the idea of cloning Michael Jordan, right? You take Michael Jordan, you clone his DNA, and you have this baby that you're going to grow up and hope to become as good as Michael Jordan. It's unlikely it's going to happen because Jordan obviously had a very specific upbringing. He had specific training. He had challenges he faced. He supposedly, when he was in school as a young kid, he got cut from his team, which might have been a rumor. But, even going beyond that in NCAA, he claims that he wasn't going to be Michael Jordan had he not hit that game-winning shot in the NCAA finals, right? So you wouldn't just necessarily clone someone and just have them end up being the same player. But people have taken that a step further, and they've said, like, the 1984 draft. I've heard people argue this. They've said that if you look at the prospects that came out in that draft, Hakeem went number 1, Bowie number 2, Jordan number 3. If a different team was picking number 1, some people have said that they still would have taken Hakeem, even though that sounds so crazy right now, because Jordan ends up being the greatest player of all time. But they're like, if I want to win a championship, I know that Hakeem's going to guarantee me 50-plus wins and a chance to win a championship, because big men at that time are so hugely important. And with Jordan, he was a dominant scorer right off the bat, but his first couple of years, they were below 500. It wasn't until really Pippen showed up that they were able to build this great team. And even then, he had a whole season that he missed with injury, and that probably helped him expand his shooting ability. He had all those challenges from facing the Pistons in the playoffs that helped him take his game to another level. So, what is your general thoughts on just the idea that your circumstances as a player could create this kind of multiverse where, depending on a team like where Wiggins ends up going, his future could have been different, or depending on how a guy like Rozier is drafted, his future could have been different?
No, definitely, absolutely. Think about it. If Portland, they didn't have Drexler, I think they would have taken Jordan. I think that was the whole thing. The problem before, remember back then, it was so it's position specific.
Right.
Think about it. Let's say they do take him, and all of a sudden Drexler's playing the 3 or Jordan's playing the 3. He might not become the player that he became. Right. I think just at the same token, you get a player like Wiggins, and I don't know, because now that I think about it, he did have some good guys around him to build him up. I mean, he had KG for like a year and a half as a / assistant coach, and I don't know, maybe some guys just lack that competitive fire. I think Rozier was really well served though, where he landed, because remember, he was playing shooting guard in Louisville. So I think the GD league served him well, and he needed to get reps as a point guard.
Yeah, I do think it really depends on the circumstances. And I think it depends on, I guess, the opportunities and also kind of the mentors you have. So I think the perfect example of this from a Celtics standpoint is Rajon Rondo. So when Rondo was drafted, he was the 21st pick. I think, he probably had a ceiling as someone I would have figured as like a plus starter. But you think about the opportunity he had coming into this team. So his first season, he ends up being the 3rd string point guard behind Delonte West and Sebastian Telfair. So he immediately has to fight for this role. And then his second year, the whole roster's gutted, and we have KG, Ray, and Pierce. I mean, talk about having mentors. Like, KG is a maniac. One guy that I never felt like he was doing it for money. Like, he actually generally seemed like someone who would have done this for free. And just incredible intensity and focus. Then you have Ray Allen, who is literally obsessive compulsive disorder. Just his amount of training that he puts into his game, hell of a mentor there. But it goes beyond just the big 3 that Rondo had around him. His coach, Doc Rivers, was a former all-star point guard. His GM, Danny Ainge, was a former all-star point guard. His first year, he got to play with Sam Cassell, who was a former all-star point guard. His 3rd season in the league, he got to play with, I know the guy was past his prime, but Stephon Marbury was a former all-star. You got to watch him. I mean, I think because he had this amazing, perfect set of circumstances, Rondo's ceiling went from being a plus starter to an all-star. He made 4 all-star teams.
Well, yeah, and also you got to factor in who he was playing on the court with, because you had guys that could space the floor for him. That's what he needed. I mean, the guy can't shoot. He's never been able to shoot, so you can't put him with non-shooters. I mean, the only non-shooter that we had in the starting lineup was Perk, but if you remember when we would close out teams, you'd have Posey at the 4, and then you'd put KG at the 5 or whatever. You'd go small. So it would be perfect for Rondo.
Absolutely agree. So, yeah. It's amazing having some agreement with Eddie20 about this, because I totally agree with that. I think that Rondo, he was obviously very, very gifted, but his shooting ability kind of made him a liability when he didn't have the ball. And that was something I think I argued with a lot of people at the time who were telling me that Rondo was a better point guard than Chris Paul. Like, Rondo was amazing, but if he did not have the ball in his hands, he was kind of a problem, and we luckily had a team where he had shooters all around him. Don't
you remember we used to have Rondo running like down the baseline when Pierce would have ISOs at the top of the key? Because you had to hide him, because a defender's not going to leave Rondo underneath the basket. So they had to like at least respect him there. But that's how you used to hide him. And then we had the issue, remember, with Kobe in the finals, that was basically a free safety. And that was an issue. That was a real issue. He played off, 8 feet off Rondo and
yep.
helped out everywhere else.
I think that was the first time anyone ever called me a troll on Celticsblog, is because I refused to believe that Rondo was the best point guard in the league. But I think I said at the time, I was like, it was interesting that every time Rondo was hurt, and I'm not trying to say Rondo was a bad player. He was gifted, but every time Rondo would be hurt, the ball would actually go through Pierce or KG. And our offense didn't really suffer that much. But the whole point I'm trying to make is that Rondo is a perfect example of a guy who, because of his circumstances, because of his system, was able to go well beyond this theoretical ceiling. And I think another guy who's a poster child for this would be Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard's 15th pick. He obviously had potential, but because he played on that Spurs team and had awesome mentors and a great system, was able to slowly develop over these years into being now, he's like an MVP level player. Right.
Then you have the other guy like Gabe Pruitt, who I was like, wow, okay, he's going to be pretty decent. And then you never hear from him again.
Right. So I think that if you hear that, I think your initial thought process would be, well, it's better for a player to be drafted into a great team where they can grow slowly. But I do think that reps matter. So Kevin Durant recently was on Bill Simmons' podcast, and it was kind of a leading question, but Bill Simmons asked him, what is Tatum's ceiling? Is he an MVP? And Durant said, yeah, he's got the talent to do that. But then Durant pointed out that his circumstances were very different. When Durant came into the league, he played on a crappy Seattle team that won like 20 games, and he got to take as many shots as he wanted. So he took, like, his rookie season, he took 18 shots per game, and he had to get through those reps, right? So he shot 43% from the field that season, and he shot 29% from 3. But because Durant had the system where he could just kind of experiment with no pressure on him and no real expectations, I feel like that first season was pivotal and the player he became, because the next season he was so much more prepared. And part of me sometimes wonders, with like a guy like Tatum, would he be best served to reach his potential if he's playing on a team like, Donovan Mitchell right now is taking 19 shots per game. He's shooting terribly. He's shooting 40% from the field, 29%. But is Donovan Mitchell going to end up being better for that, as opposed to Tatum, who has to kind of fit into this role? No,
I think it's just a different caliber of player. I'm not really a Mitchell fan. I see a lot of Steve Francis in him. Bad shot taker. His defense this year has fallen off a little too. Last year, I remember he was playing really good defense. I don't know. This year, he's kind of taken a step back. As far as Durant goes, it's a different level of talent, though. Look at Luka. Luka, you could pretty much plug him in anywhere, and he's going to excel. Tatum, I think, is fine in the system. Think about it. He might develop bad habits. He goes to a bad team and he's jacking up shots, and then he develops a lot of bad habits. But I think this is a good way for him to get his shots, play competitive, meaningful games, and learn from like the veterans we have.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that the Celtics are balancing right now. So I think that last season Tatum just came in. He didn't want to step on any toes, so he basically just would take open shots. He wasn't really trying to create for himself. Almost to a fault, felt like at some points that he was one of our most talented players and really should have attacked the basket and tried to get his own shot. And this season, some people are getting upset about the long twos that he takes, and they get upset about the contested shots he takes. Mm-hmm. I personally love that. I love seeing him do that. Like last night, he missed a couple of them. He didn't shoot very efficiently, but I love seeing him do that because he needs those reps. If he's ever going to be a go-to scorer that's capable of carrying a team offensively, he can't just be this cog in the system. He needs to have opportunities. That's something that's probably difficult for the Celtics to balance right now, and I think that it is a little bit of experimentation, but I personally like to see it. Like, what do you think when you see him jack up a contested fadeaway? I mean, to me, I kind of like it. What are your thoughts on it?
I like it if it's at the end of the shot clock because he can make it, but I hate these early contested shots he takes up. I like him being aggressive. Obviously, everybody does. But I want him to make that extra pass when it's there. A lot of times, I can't remember him dishing off to an open teammate when the D collapses. I don't know. I can't really think of it. I know I'm sure he has. I just can't think of it. Same way as Rozier. Rozier takes a lot of bad shots too. I think it's just the notion of like, all right, he got his, I got to get mine type of thing. And I hate when we're playing like that. I actually think that Gordon Hayward should be our main facilitator. I love when the ball's in his hands. He's got a great feel for the game. I know that Stauskas wanted to like trade him to like Siberia, but yeah, he's the best facilitator we have. He's got great feel for the game, and he's always making the right play, the extra pass. Is he all there mentally? No, but I think he's going to get there. Do you remember what we used to do with Paul Pierce, that we used to have Eddie House set a screen for him, and all of a sudden House wouldn't obviously roll. He'd pop out, flare out, and it would cause confusion. I would love to see Kyrie Irving and Hayward in that set. Irving sets a high screen for Hayward and let Hayward make the decision.
I'm going to have to resync with Scott about that, because Hayward's had a couple of great games and pretty encouraging. With Tatum, one of the criticisms of his game is that he takes too many long twos. And what's interesting, though, is that I really think they are trying to model him after a guy like Kevin Durant or Dirk Nowitzki. I think the reason they're trying to do that is because there's not a lot of players in the NBA who are able to shoot as well as he is, handle as well as he is, and have like this incredible arsenal of offensive moves that kind of made Dirk and Durant unique in that they had the height to shoot over basically anyone. And I think Tatum's length kind of puts him in that theoretical mold. So, a lot of people have gotten upset about him taking the long twos. I'm looking at his percentage of shots by distance right now, and it looks like 18% of Tatum's shots come in the 16 feet to 3-point range. I guess that would be the long two range. And just like looking at it earlier, Kevin Durant, 19% of his shots are taken in that range. So that's totally in the mold of Durant. And actually, Durant's career, he's taken 21% of his shots in that kind of long two range. And with Dirk, it was even more. It was like 31% of Dirk's shots were long twos. So I don't necessarily mind as much when I see him take those long twos. And I just think it's part of his development,
Well, I think another part of his development is going to be his body. I think he's a little bit bigger this year, but he's going to continue to physically mature. I mean, last year, if you remember, he was constantly getting stripped going to the basket. This year, I'm not seeing it as much, and hopefully, like as the years progress, it becomes even less and less. And he's able to use his physicality, talent, and length to score.
Yep, I agree with that.
Damn, you're agreeing with me too much.
It's true.
You know what it is, though? Every time I usually disagreed with you, I posted something. So it just seemed that I'm always disagreeing with you. But if I agreed with you, I wouldn't post it because it's not fun. So that's why you probably think I was always against you.
I agree with that. No, just joking. No, that is something. I mean, personally, if I'm sharing an opinion that echoes everyone else, I kind of feel like it's a waste of time. So I think I've obviously get labeled a contrarian pretty often because it seems like I'm only posting outlandish, crazy, outside the box ideas, but sometimes it's like, oh, this is kind of an interesting take. And I kind of put it out there, and they're not always popular. Kind of last things I just want to say about player development. I think the point I'm trying to make here is that it's really so many different circumstances can impact how a player develops. So you bring up Terry Rozier. He was drafted a few picks after Devin Booker. And one of the things I like to bring up is that Devin Booker was drafted into that conventionally terrible lotto team where he had the opportunity to basically right out of the gate play a ton of minutes and take a bunch of shots and get those NBA reps. Whereas Rozier spent his entire first season doing 8 games he played. He spent 14 games in the G League where he was great. So I guess the question is would it have been better for Rozier's development if he had been drafted onto a team like the Suns and had been able to just kind of what Devin Booker did, which was just jack up shots and try to play and kind of figure it out? And on the flip side, what happens if the Celtics end up taking Devin Booker and he's on a team that's, stacked with guard talent at the time? And they had Avery Bradley and they had Marcus Smart's on the team. I think Isaiah Thomas is on the team. So if Devin Booker spends those first couple months buried on our bench and spends a bunch of time in G League, does he end up playing as well as he is right now, or is his progression slower? What do you think of that?
Well, I'm not really a big Booker guy. I mean, his defense is awful. He plays one side of the floor. So obviously he's on a team that they're not expected to win. He takes up a lot of shots, but we'll see as they get better and better. And in the playoffs, people are going to zero in on him. I mean, you're going to, the whole switch, you get a high screen, and then they're going to attack Booker to no end. So As far as Rozier, I just do think, I'm not sure if he would have done that well developing the position. I mean, learning the point guard position is a difficult position to master. He hasn't even mastered it yet. He's more like a two guard, but I like that he got reps in the G League. He was pretty bad. If you remember how awful he used to be,
right? Even
in preseason and anytime he got meaningful minutes, he was pretty bad. He's developed and he's changed. But imagine the scrutiny he would have gotten if he got drafted by Phoenix. He's getting forced minutes and he's putting up clunkers.
You could be right. You could be right that Terry Rozier's development is best served to be kind of brought along slowly and to get these bench minutes. I'm just kind of into this idea of the multiverse. I just saw the Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, which is probably my favorite movie of the year. But it makes me wonder, like, what happens if a guy like Darius Miles, who has a lot of physical attributes that make his ceiling theoretically really high, what happens if Darius Miles doesn't end up on the Clippers and ends up going on a team like, the Spurs or something where they can develop him? Does his career end up better?
I don't think so. I think as far as Miles go, if you think about it, he was a wrong player at the wrong time. Put him in today's NBA and think of him as like a athletic 4.
Okay.
It's just a total different game right now. So he was playing 3 and he couldn't really shoot. And yeah, Miles right now, just like Okafor, just like your boy Okafor, you put him back then and he's a perennial all-star.
Yeah. The game has definitely changed. I definitely have eaten some shit on my support of Okafor. We could talk about that in a little bit, but another multiverse thing. What if Kawhi Leonard goes to the Bobcats? If he's drafted by the Bobcats and not the Spurs, do you think he's an MVP player right now?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think the culture affects it. I mean, not only the players there, but think about Pop. I mean, like the way they brought him along, and he was playing a lot off the ball, and then Pop switched his system. Right. It was a lot of ball movement, and then all of a sudden, because Kawhi elevated his game, it became a lot of ISO, and he adapted. Who knows what they do on another team with Kawhi? Do they make him a 3-and-D guy and just don't let him evolve? Who knows? But I definitely do think that environment is definitely key and culture.
So here's the flip side of that. Take a guy like Darko Milicic, who obviously was drafted by a really strong Pistons team, didn't get any minutes, was kind of, they won a championship that year, had his confidence shattered, eventually just gave up. Do you think that guy and his tools, if he had been drafted on the Cavs, for instance, a really terrible team, do you think he ends up a better player, or do you think it didn't matter?
No, it didn't matter. He just
didn't matter.
Like it wasn't his tools, because he had a soft touch, physical, could run the floor. If you remember, he was pretty athletic. He could move. He just didn't care. Like the whole thing was like he didn't even like basketball. What's he doing now? Kickboxing and farming?
Right, probably. So another one, Marquise Chris and Jaylen Brown coming into that 2016 draft. They're seen as roughly equal, somewhere in the 3 to 8 range. Both raw talents, both super athletic. Had they had their places switched, and Brown ends up going to the Suns, and Chris comes to the Celtics, how are their careers looking right now? Do you think it's still the same, or do you think it would have been totally different?
I had it for Chris for sure. I think the Suns did him a disservice. Him and Bender. They draft 2 guys that basically are going to be playing the same position, and now they're sharing minutes. It was a disaster. I do think Brown would have been pretty good. He would have been the 3 over there, because you got Booker at the 2.
Right.
You put him as a slashing player with a good shooter in Booker, and yeah, I think it would have been fine. Again, Brown's the kind of player that needs the ball in his hands. He needs to get shots, so I think he would have excelled. And he does seem to work hard every year. There's been progression in his game. I know this year he's having his shooting woes, but his ball handling's improved, and I just want him to, like I said before, I just want him to get a better overall feel for the game.
It does seem like you very much lean towards the idea that having a strong foundation and a slow progression is better for a player's development. Although you do acknowledge that, like, in some instances, it might be better for them to just get lots of reps.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a talent like a Durant or a Luka,
yep.
I mean, you plug and play.
So I think that's where a lot of our disagreements come from. It's good to kind of figure out where you're coming from with that, because I think I've always been under the impression that it really just depends. It depends on the player. So, I mean, I look at a guy like Ben McLemore, who you've given me crap about for liking, but to be clear, I didn't ever think that Ben McLemore was a future star. The thing that was intriguing to me was that here was a guy who was averaging, his second year, he was averaging 12 points. He was like 21 years old. He was shooting 36% from 3. He was obviously super athletic. And the Kings are probably the most like disastrously run franchise in the NBA, especially at that point. So my thought at the time was like, I've always been interested in these like second chance players. Like we've seen guys like Chauncey Billups go on to be great players elsewhere. Joe Johnson's went on to be a great player elsewhere. Jermaine O'Neal obviously was buried in Portland until he goes to the Pacers. So I've always kind of liked the idea of second chance players. And so like with a guy like Ben McLemore, I think my comments at the time on the Celtics blog forums were like, yeah, what would happen if we brought this guy into a better system and try to like hone his talents? But do you just kind of think like once they look like a bust, they're a bust, it doesn't matter?
No, I think players could change. I just thought Ben McLemore, I mean, if you look at, he's a prototype for a two guard, right? He's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's got a sweet looking shot. Like if you see him shoot, you're like, wow, man. I remember the comparisons were the next Ray Allen, but he just wasn't a good player. Yeah. Sometimes a guy's just not good. I don't have the stats in front of me, but what did he shoot like his first couple of years from three and from the field?
Well, his first year was kind of rough. He shot 38% and then 32% from three, but he showed great improvement in his second season. He was shooting 44% from the field and 36% from three. And then, you know, for whatever reason, he just never really got there. But I think, you know, I think the problem is people will hear those kind of takes, like maybe we should take a chance on McLemore. And then they look at it 3 or 4 years later and like, wow, you were wrong on that. But not necessarily. Like, I don't know what would happen if McLemore had a change in scenery in his second season, ends up in Boston where they know how to actually develop players, or ends up on the Spurs or something. Like, there's a possibility they could have found a way to actually hone his talents and get him to be motivated. Like, it's possible, right?
I guess. I mean, I'm looking at his stats now. He really didn't, even when he got a lot of minutes his second year, 32 minutes, 3 rebounds and 1.7 assists.
Sure.
For a player, 0.9 steals. For a player that athletic, that's inexcusable.
So that kind of helps us transition to, I think, the 2 things that you've given me so much crap about on the Celtics blog forum.
Not only me.
Well, one of them is so leading up to the 2015 draft, where so many people had said that this was a draft that was 10 deep, and then after 10, there was nothing there, which we know is not true now. I mean, obviously, Devin Booker ended up being great, and we ended up taking Terry Rozier, who ended up being pretty solid. But the idea that we kept hearing from all these draft nicks at the time was that the 2015 draft is 10 deep. And that's a key reason why Danny Ainge supposedly tried to give up 4 first-round picks to move up to number 9 so he could take Justice Winslow, right? Like, I know some people have disagreements on whether or not that was the actual offer, but I've heard people like Zach Lowe say that there was 4 firsts that they were making available in a trade. One of them we can automatically assume was the number 16 pick, which ended up being used for Rozier. Another one was probably the number 28 pick, which we used on RJ Hunter. There was probably some other random future first. And then Lowe has said that the other pick that we offered was the 2016 Brooklyn pick that ended up being Jaylen Brown. So we were trying to get up into the top 10 very, very, aggressively.
Yeah. And I think the other one was the Memphis one. Ainge kind of alluded to that. Remember, he said something along the lines of teams don't really value these future picks and these protections on the picks. The only pick we had at the time that was protected was the Memphis one. So it had to be that one included.
Right.
Which now it's not a bad pick. It's going to be late lottery.
So that was my mindset, and I'm gonna let you know, like, I was wrong about these, but I want to give you a little more context. So there was 2 things that I had posted on Celtics blog at the time. One of them was basically throwing out the idea. I'm like, would you trade the number 16 pick for Anthony Bennett? And I know that if you read that actual post, I even say, I'm like, I know this is ridiculous. It's stupid. The guy's had a terrible career so far, but I'm just like asking hypothetically, just looking at this guy, he had sleep apnea and he had all these issues where he was overweight. He still kind of showed some tools, like he was big, he had a nice stroke, and he was explosive. And I threw it out there. I was basically just throwing it out there, a random thing. I'm like, would you trade the number 16 pick for Anthony Bennett? Acknowledging that it was impossible because salary-wise, Bennett made way too much money. But, obviously that was a dumb idea, but you've brought it up so many times. You're like, Larbird33 thought that Anthony Bennett was going to be a superstar. I never thought that guy was going to be a superstar. I just was curious about the hypothetical. Would he have actually had more potential than what was available at 16?
No, I kind of wanted either Rozier, well, after the fact, but at the time was the guys I think we were targeting was Decker and Portis, sorry. And those 2 guys, I liked their potential, and I just felt Bennett was pretty much dead weight.
Bennett was a disaster. He was definitely a disaster. Although go ahead, sorry.
But wasn't he projected to go like mid to late lottery, and then all of a sudden he jumped?
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the things that Chad Ford draft here is that draft. He had said that there was his draft 2013 that there was no guy in the top 2 tiers, that there was no potential superstar. And obviously we saw Giannis eventually surpass those expectations, but I mean, Bennett was just kind of out of nowhere, and the idea was just, I guess the Cavs had that, like, oh, he's big and he can kind of be explosive and can shoot. But when I was bringing it up, it wasn't because I thought he was going to be a superstar. I was just genuinely curious, and I wasn't going one way or the other way. I was just kind of curious, would anyone make that trade? And of course, unanimously, nobody said they would trade number 16 for Tony Bennett.
Tony Bennett?
Tony Bennett.
All right.
Yeah, Tony Bennett. But the other one I made is basically like a couple weeks later, and you've given me so much crap for this one as well. It was a similar thing. It was a year after Nick Stauskas had been a rookie, and I had the same question. I'm like, this is Nick Stauskas. You know, he's obviously on the outs in Sacramento. Would you trade the number 16 pick for Nick Stauskas? It was another one that's kind of like, let's take a chance on one of these second chance players. And you've many times have brought up in the forums that I thought Nick Stauskas was going to be a superstar. I mean, my positives for Nick at the time were that he in college shot 44% from three, and over the last second half of the season, he had just shot 42% from three for the Kings. And I'm like, hey, would this guy have more potential than what we're going to take at number 16? And to be fair, there were quite a few people who said that, yes, they would trade number 16 in a weak draft for number 8 in a good draft.
Well, with him, remember, he was supposed to be decently athletic. And the problem is that got exposed really quick. Same thing happened with Mario Hezonja. He was supposed to be athletic, and all of a sudden, he could jump, but he had no lateral quickness. And I think that was the issue with Stauskas. If he had had more athleticism, I would have been on board because he could definitely shoot. Just he can't defend.
Well, we do know now that Stauskas did not end up being a good player, and he did have a change of scenery, and it didn't work out. But I thought it was an interesting question at a time. I just want you to cut me a little slack on bringing up Nick Stauskas, because at the time I thought it was an interesting idea. And I actually want to point this out. Anyone who hasn't seen this, go on YouTube and search for Kings 2014 Draft War Room. That video is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. Like, it's the actual war room of the Sacramento Kings leading up to
welcome home or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's like the most insane thing. I watched it and I was just shocked by how incompetent these people seem as they're like in their war room. They're like, maybe we should try to trade number 8 and try to get up to number 2 and take Joel Embiid. And it's like, what? And then they're like, let's call up Danny Ainge and see if we can. It was just like, and at some point they're like, Stauskas our guy. He's the one. He's big like Clay, but shoots like Steph. It was nuts. Watch this thing.
Well, you know who I really like and was a draft pick mid first round? Joe Harris. Yeah. Joe Harris is really, really exciting. I would love to have Joe Harris on our team. I mean, it won't be in a 1-for-1, but if you could do a 3-team trade that you're able to get a Joe Harris and even trade somebody like Rozier, who we're in all likelihood not going to be able to resign, I would love Joe Harris. And he's got another year on his contract. Have you seen his percentages?
Yeah, I'm looking right now. It's crazy, man.
It's insane.
49% from three. Yeah, that guy's not getting much credit right now because nobody pays attention to Brooklyn.
Nobody pays attention to him. And the thing with him is he's kind of like a Redick, that he's not just a standstill guy. He's moving off screens. So he doesn't need the ball in his hand. So he's like the perfect guy that you could put him in our system. He could run around screens, action off the ball, and he's not holding the ball. So I think that would be a perfect guy for our team. I do think we need to add shooting.
Right.
We have a lot of guys that can shoot, but they're not shooters. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to be perfectly clear, I'm not advocating trading for Nick Stauskas at this point. I just wanted to say, I was wrong about Stauskas. I'm sorry, Eddie. You were right, but at the time, I just thought it was an interesting idea. All right. So maybe do you want to talk a little bit about the Sixers? Because I think we've argued about them for so many years. I think a good place to start, though, is this. So before we even get into the Sixers, I want to talk about NBA champions. Since 1959, there's only been 16 franchises that have won an NBA championship. Essentially, every team that's won a championship has had a superstar level player, with few exceptions. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, yeah, obviously there's eras. There was Bill Russell, there's Wilt Chamberlain, then you have the Bird and Magic era, you have Michael Jordan, and now LeBron, Steph Curry, I would say, is a superstar. But I would go a step further and say that almost every champion has had an elite big. And that might just because, it's a big man's game, especially in the past. It's changed quite a bit. But if you go through pretty much every champion, Celtics had Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale. The Lakers had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You go further in, there's obviously the Shaq era, Duncan on the Spurs. Even a team like the Dallas Mavericks, I think they had Tyson Chandler playing at a defensive player of the year level. Even a team like the Miami Heat, Chris Bosh was sort of an elite big. I'm being a little broad when I say elite big, but...
Right, and before that, Shaq and Zoe.
Shaq and Zoe, right. And then on the Cavs, I think you can consider LeBron James an elite big because he's 6'9", 270. But, you know, Kevin Love kind of qualifies as kind of this elite big. On the Golden State Warriors, Draymond Green, you know, he's kind of elite big. So setting that as the foundation of what you build a championship on and how many teams have just not even come close, I get where the Sixers were coming from. Just look at the Philadelphia 76ers and look at the kind of success they had before they decided to start tanking. They had 150-win season since 1990. Since 1990, they only won 50 games once. I mean, you're just looking through this and it's just like tons of mediocrity. And then finally in 2000, they end up winning 56 games because of Allen Iverson, a player they tanked for. And they also had Dikembe Mutombo, who was an elite big at the time.
Right.
So, I mean, you're talking about perpetual mediocrity for 20 plus years with the lone exception of Iverson, who they tanked for. And leading up to them hiring Hinkie, Philly had been a treadmill team for the past 3 years. I think that's just the worst position to be in for a team. So, you know, you've called me a Sixers fan. I was never actually a Sixers fan. What I actually liked about what they were doing was that they had the balls to basically say, let's hire this guy Hinkie who has this vision of just straight up tanking. And I know it's terrible. I know it's like, you know, anti-competitive, but I really got it. Like, so a single superstar can change the fortunes of a team. We've seen LeBron is a perfect example of this. The Cavs go from 17 wins to 66 wins to 19 wins to 57 wins with just him coming and leaving and coming. You know, I get what Philly was trying to do. I was never like a fan of Philly. It was just like I was a fan of the idea that they had the gal to basically say, let's take this kind of video game strategy and just kind of like go all in on trying to get a star.
I think they went about it the wrong way.
Yeah.
Yeah, they stockpiled on centers, and then all of a sudden it hindered everybody's development. You have Noel, then you draft Embiid. Embiid gets hurt, fine, so you could run with Noel another year. Well, yeah, you could develop him further, and then you could trade him while his stock is high. When some people who will remain nameless thought he was going to be a defensive player of the year, you trade him then. Especially if all of a sudden you expect Embiid to come back and you have like, you know, high hope for that. Then not only don't they do that, then they draft another big that's not mobile, that has to live in the lane. So you get Okafor, and they start playing them at the 4 and the 5 together. Disaster. Why were they obligated to take Okafor? I mean, if Okafor was their guy, fine, then trade Noel. But if, let's say, you like Noel, you like his defense, and you think he could be a fit or whatever with Embiid, which doesn't seem likely, but let's say it was, trade down. Why are you obligated to take that pick and select the best player you have on the board? I mean, think about it. If they all of a sudden traded down, and now, like, obviously this is hindsight, but they trade down and they take a Booker. Imagine the pieces that they would be able to get adding a Booker to the team. We were gonna trade 4 picks to move up 5 spots, 6 spots.
Right.
Imagine what they would have gotten from 4 to 10. 4 to 9.
I think, especially in retrospect, you can look at what they did or didn't do and say they made quite a few mistakes. But I kind of get what they were trying to do. So the league has changed quite a bit now, and I think we're both in agreement at this point that Okafor, just because of his lack of defensive ability, his lack of ability to stretch the floor, like he doesn't really fit the mold of a potential star at this point. Maybe Brook Lopez is like his best case scenario.
But his rebounding too, that's an issue. Because like you could have a guy that's mobile like Canner, and he could score inside, but he could rebound the ball. He's killed us on the boards, but Okafor just couldn't rebound either. So it's like a one-dimensional guy, a one-trick pony that is bringing nothing else to the table.
Well, let's go through these one by one. So Nerlens Noel. So Noel came out in 2013 and was injured at the time, right? Basically all the mock drafts that I was reading and again, I don't follow college ball, but all the people that were talking about him were saying that this was a guy he's a raw center with elite defensive potential and a very high ceiling. And a lot of people had said that he was the best talent. Actually, most people were saying that he was the best talent in the draft. He just happened to be injured. So just like to put this out there for you to see where I'm coming from, I didn't start liking Noel when he went to the Sixers. I actually was super into the idea of trading Rajon Rondo for him at the time. And actually, I just went back and I found an old thread. And basically, I was pissed that the Sixers had ended up getting him, because when it was first announced that they traded for him, they reported it that the trade was the Pelicans giving up Drew Holiday and a first for Noel. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. This guy's supposed to be a really good prospect, and it makes sense that you'd have to give up a borderline star guard and a first. And then I realized that no, they actually gave Holiday for Noel and a first. It was the other way around, so they actually got Holiday and a first. So I was mad at the time. I was like, why didn't we do that for Rondo? Like, I don't think Rondo's going to be our long-term guard. I'd rather tank. I'd rather get this Nerlens Noel kid and hope that he ends up being a star and then get some other assets. So it wasn't like I just started just jumping on the Noel bandwagon because he was on the Sixers, you know?
Yeah. Well, the thing about Noel, I mean, what I didn't like about him is he's supposed to be like a rim runner. That's fine. You could have rim runners, but you're supposed to have good hands. Noel has rock for hands. So he's not really a guy that you could just throw like lobs and he's going to just automatically catch it. I mean, besides all else, I mean, the guy really lacks basketball feel. I don't like him. I've never really thought he was all that. He's supposed to be like the epitome of a foundation defensive player. But yeah, he was always a little thin. I never thought he rebounded well in traffic. Obviously, he's athletic and he's going to get loose balls, chase loose balls. But when you tie him up, he's not going to rebound well, and you could post him up. I think that was a weak draft as well, right?
Sure, yeah, I mean, at the time, it was definitely thought as a weak draft. Obviously, Giannis was available quite a few picks later, but I got the logic in trying to get him. Noel, in his first couple of seasons, he was putting up ridiculous defensive stats, but it was like 2 steals, 2 blocks. I think there's been a bunch of articles that now have written about him, how he basically was chasing these blocks and chasing these steals and wasn't really a great defensive player from a team standpoint. But I mean, I think, like you said, I think the idea was that he was going to end up being like a Tyson Chandler or a Ben Wallace or something. Right. I got the idea of getting him, but the other thing that you have to really understand from Philly's perspective that was really key to that, people lump him in as one of the guys they tanked for. That's not true. He was basically the cause. He was what helped them get the effect of tanking. So they traded Holiday, who was one of their only decent players on this perpetual mediocre team. And then in return, they end up getting Noel, who they knew wasn't going to play that year because he was injured, and then a future first that ended up being Dario Saric. So, I mean, from that perspective, you could kind of even call that still a win. Like, they ended up, because of that trade, in a large part because of that trade, that's what helped them bottom out and get Joel Embiid the next year. And because of that trade, they ended up getting Saric, who was a key part in them getting Jimmy Butler. So I don't know if you can really call that a loss for Philly, even though Noel ended up being a disaster. I mean, it kind of worked out for him. I do think they really screwed up, and they should have gotten value for Noel when they had the opportunity, because he at some point had a lot of trade value, and they ended up getting essentially nothing for him. But even
Okafor, after his first year, I mean, his value was high. But it's funny, isn't it ironic that all of a sudden they draft Fultz, hoping he could be like everything Holiday is? And
right. Well, we can get the Fultz too, but so the next guy they draft is Joel Embiid, right? So I did this post on Reddit a while back, probability of success by tanking, and I did a bunch of really weak math to look at a 40-year period of top 6 draft picks. There's about 240 guys taken in the top 6, and I was just trying to figure out, like, how likely is it from these picks? How likely is it that you're going to end up a star? And I mean, basically, after doing a bunch of math, I found out that a top 6 pick has a 43% chance of being an all-star, which is not great, but likely that, the top talent in the league is going to come into the top of the draft, and by taking a top 6 pick, you're about a 43% chance that's going to become an all-star. But the thing is, if you start getting multiple top 6 picks, then it magnifies substantially. So if you had 2 years of top 6 picks, it's about a 70% chance one of those guys is going to become an all-star. If you have a 3 years of tanking, basically, of top 6 picks, it becomes a 83.5% chance that you're going to end up with an all-star. So the 3 guys basically that Philly tanks for are Embiid, Okafor, and Simmons. And just by this basic math that I did, there's about an 83% chance that one of those guys ends up being a star, and it looks like they got him in Embiid and possibly also Simmons as well. So I kind of got it from that standpoint,
Yeah, that makes sense. When did you start
so I started in 1972, and I ended up in 2012. I mean, I knew this was not like a perfect study in any way, but generally the top talent comes out in the top of the draft. So I was wondering, like, how likely it is that you're going to get a star. You can kind of look at it from Boston's standpoint too, right? So we obviously didn't tank. We did tank in 2013, but we ended up getting 3 guys in the top 6: Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, and Jayson Tatum. And I think you can roughly say that there's like an 80% chance that one of those guys is going to be a star, and I think it's probably going to be Tatum. So I get the logic of bottoming out. But on the flip side, and this is something that I should acknowledge now, and I probably didn't acknowledge as much, I look at a team like the Sacramento Kings, who have missed the playoffs for 12 years and have had quite a few top picks, or a team like the Timberwolves, right? They, up until recently, missed the playoffs 13 years in a row. And one year they had 2 picks in the top 6, and they ended up taking Ricky Rubio number 5 and Johnny Flynn number 6. They missed out on Steph Curry. So it's really possible that, you know, Philly could have failed regardless just because of dumb decisions.
The King thing is interesting. They're good. They're really good, and
they're good right now. Yeah.
No, they're going to be good. Fox is awesome.
Right, and I mean they basically have done essentially what Philly did in a roundabout way, because they have now Fox, who is one of the top picks, and then they have
Marvin Bagley,
right? So that's another one.
Bogdanovich, who could handle the ball. He comes off the bench. He could shoot. Buddy Hield. Willie Cauley-Stein has obviously improved a lot. He's in a contract year, but he's improved. Yeah, they're good. They're good. I really like them.
So I get the logic that Philly was trying to get basically a star big. So they went with Embiid first. That was their first tank job. They end up getting Embiid as a prize. Embiid's injured. So they try to take Okafor's insurance. Now, I think we're looking at it now and we're like, well, that was such a stupid pick. But like, you know that like at the time, there was articles being written about how the Wolves were still considering taking him number 1. And people thought it was crazy that the Lakers passed on him at number 2. And, you know, there was even articles that came out that said Boston was willing to give up a Godfather offer to trade up and try to get Okafor if he slipped to number 3. So it wasn't like, I know we're looking at it now and saying, wow, you know, I was dumb for liking Okafor, but pretty much everyone liked Okafor at the time, right?
I think there was a lot of misdirection, though. I wonder if like that was just a smokescreen because they wanted to go up to draft Winslow. Because Winslow seems like the type of player like Ainge would covet. Okafor really doesn't. I mean, think about it. After when Okafor became available, there was no interest from the Celtics.
You say that, but like there was, and there's been a lot of people who disagree with this. But so his rookie season, he puts up 17 points, 7 rebounds, and 1 block. And then I think he played about 55 games or something and got injured. Right. But in the midst of his rookie season, there was this interview with Danny Ainge and Toucher and Rich. And they basically asked him, like, have you considered giving up this upcoming 2016 Brooklyn first in any package? And this was at the time when that pick still had the potential to be Ben Simmons. Like it was unprotected 2016 Brooklyn pick. And Ainge said, yes, I have considered putting this in a package. And we came close to doing it, and the team backed out. And then about a week later, Steve Bullpit reports that the player that Ainge was talking about was Okafor. And then tons of different publications ran with it. It was like on ESPN and Yahoo and all these different places. But some people just refuse to believe this. Like you don't believe that we actually tried to trade for Okafor his rookie season?
I mean, I know his value was high, but I was talking more about like afterwards when they were trying to like when he wasn't playing and he was available for very little. Who knows? Maybe then they thought they had something there. Obviously, his defense was always lacking, so who knows? Maybe they thought they could put him into a system surrounded by good defensive players. Remember, we had Smart, we had Bradley, we had Crowder, so we had good perimeter players that might be able to offset some of his woes. So maybe that was the thinking. I wouldn't doubt it, but obviously, I know that later on, once the lack of improvement showed the lack of maturity, then we had no interest at all. If not, I'm pretty sure we had a lot of second-round picks that we could have definitely sent Philly's way for him.
Yeah, I think they definitely blew an opportunity to get assets for him. And I understand, like, so at the time, it was reported by Bullpit that it was basically the Sixers who backed out of that potential trade. If you think about it, at the time, they had their own pick that had a potential to be Ben Simmons, who everyone thought was going to be like this great, amazing player. But they also would have been getting that Brooklyn pick, which would have given them 2 cracks at trying to get Ben Simmons. And yet they backed out of it. And I kind of get why. I mean, they had gotten so much heat for basically taking these guys who were redshirted their first season. And then there was all this kind of publicity at the time about how they needed to stop tanking, and there was a lot of heat on Hinkie. And within a couple months, Hinkie was gone. So I get, like, it would have been a bad look for Philly to give up their guy who's a rookie averaging 18 points for another draft pick. That would have been terrible. They probably should have done it, though. From Philly's perspective, they really blew it, you know?
Right. Yeah, you could see the thinking, because all of a sudden now, like, they're extending the process. So yeah, I could see it why they would back out. But yeah, in retrospect, they definitely should have done it.
Obviously, that was a deadline trade. We were trying to get Okafor, but even on the 2016 draft, once we knew we had the third pick, there was a bunch of articles that said that a lot of people were on board with trading that number 3 pick for Jello Okafor. And in fact, like Bill Simmons was one of those guys I'm looking at right now, this article where Simmons was like, I think they're going to trade for Okafor. I think that almost happened in February. It makes a ton of sense for Philly. And he basically said that like Philly should use the 3rd pick to take Jamal Murray, and that Okafor made sense for Boston, who was trying to get this like dominant center. So I think, we look at it now and we're like, well, Philly was completely stupid for taking him, but they had opportunities to get assets for him, and it kind of made sense why they took him in the first place, If
I were a Philly fan, I would have liked him to add veterans too and go with a guy. If you're going to have, if Okafor's your guy, go with Okafor. If even like, okay, you could at least develop Okafor while Embiid's still out or whatever. Embiid's only playing 30 games. You could still run with Okafor, that's fine. But you have to have like the veteran guidance there. Like kind of the same thing you were saying with Rondo. Yep. That Rondo was mentored by, the veteran presence, Doc, and what we had. But Philly players, they were thrown at the wolves. Put Rondo in that Philly situation. Rondo, second-year Rondo. How does that turn out?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that he probably wouldn't have been the player he became. And, I acknowledge that. I want to just tell you, I acknowledge that because I think you thought that I was just a pro Sixers fan the entire time. I do think that their developmental system probably ruined any potential that Noel had, and probably ruined any potential that Okafor had. I mean, those guys obviously spending those couple years not knowing their role and having to, fight for minutes. And in some cases, Okafor was just like DMP, didn't even play. Right. Like having a better system where they could have actually, like in their formative years, gotten them the opportunities to learn the right way, and probably would have been better off, right?
And they were sharing minutes. A lot of times on the floor, they were both together. So it's not like, I know then that proved the failure. Then they were like, staggering minutes, and Okafor would come in, Noel would come out, stuff like that. But remember that at a certain point, they were both starting. So it was some bad minutes.
It didn't work, right?
Exactly.
I had said that the idea of a losing culture is horseshit, but I want to clarify that, like, when I say it, losing culture is horseshit, I'm talking about the idea of a team can go very quickly from a nothing to a something just because of talent. Like, we've seen the Celtics do this multiple times. We saw Boston go from a 29-win team to 61 as soon as Larry Bird showed up. We saw them go from a 24-win team to 66 as soon as Kevin Garnett shows up. We tanked in 2013, and then a couple years later, we're a contender. Again, that whole Cavs thing, LeBron James going to and from the Cavs makes them a contender. So the idea like this losing culture is just going to infect a team and keep them terrible forever, I think that's bullshit. I don't think that's true, but I acknowledge trying to develop talent in that environment probably isn't ideal. Although, like, Covington was one of those G League talent guys that Hinkie just kind of filled up his roster with, and then he ended up being like a viable NBA talent. Do you think that environment, that kind of like that terrible losing environment, benefited his career? Or do you think that even him would have been better off playing on a team where he wasn't getting minutes?
No, I see with Covington, I think it could have gone either way. You have to sometimes you also have to credit a player for just working hard. Because Covington obviously improved his entire game, especially his shooting. And I don't think he's a defender people think he is. I remember Tatum just destroying him last year. And I don't think Covington has like the best lateral quickness around. I think he's physical. He's a smart defender. He's got length, quick hands. I don't think he's the best defender around. But obviously he's improved on his shot, and he became a great glue guy.
Yep, and he became a key asset for them, right? Because they were able to use both Covington and Sarge to get Jimmy Butler.
I wonder if they could go back in time a month ago if they still do that trade.
I mean, that's interesting because I still think, ultimately the reason I supported the idea is because this team had not been successful at all. I mean, they had not had a 50-win season in like 20 years. And from that standpoint, you can kind of call it a success, right? So there's this kind of common idea that GMs always say that when they take over a job, they're like, I think this is going to be like a 3 to 5 year process. And usually these GMs fail. The only guy that I've seen that actually succeeded in that and the best at it was Danny Ainge. He took over the Celtics in 2003. And then by 2008, they were a champion. So he literally did it in 5 years. And there's that famous clip of Mikhail Prokhorov for Brooklyn saying, I think we can be a contender in 3 years or 5 years, and then that never happens. But Hinkie kind of did it too. Like, I know that it's silly, but Hinkie got hired in 2013, and by April 2018 they had won their 50th game. Like, I know they're not a champion, but he succeeded in making this team relevant again, you know?
But you're a Simmons guy?
Ben Simmons?
Yeah, are you a Simmons guy?
He's probably like a 6'10 Rondo, right? Like, he has great vision. He's able to score really, really well and get these triple doubles, but he obviously can't shoot.
Yeah, I mean, is Simmons going to be a guy that's really good against bad teams, but then all of a sudden when they play in conference finals or in a finals, a team could just totally take him out, kind of like what we did to them last year.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't know if his shot's ever going to come around. I do think that, like, it's a little, I think it's a little unfair to say that this guy, like, people are labeling him some kind of like playoff choker right now because Boston kicked him in the teeth, right? But like in the first round, he averaged 18 points, 11 rebounds and 9 assists and 2.4 steals against Miami, and it was his rookie season, right? I'm not officially his rookie season, but it was his first year. You really think that like his ceiling is not great and that he's going to be this problem?
His shot, it's his form. Have you seen him? His like form, his elbows all the way out.
It's terrible.
It's awful. So there's no way that he's not going to be able to improve his shot with that form. So he's got to fix his shot. Like, just his shot is broken.
Explain to me though why, and I'm not that I'm disagreeing with you, but explain to me why you see Ben Simmons as different than Giannis, who's another guy who can't really shoot but is, I don't know, effective.
Oh yeah, but Giannis could at least he'll take shots, and I know he's struggling this year from threes, but Giannis could at least shoot a little bit. And Giannis's form is actually fine.
Right.
That's the biggest issue. I mean, if he had really good form, then I'll be like, you know what, there's a chance.
So one of the things you were saying when you were completely convinced that I was a Philly fan, we had this kind of back and forth, and my whole point was that I think once you get that transcendent talent, whether that's Embiid or Simmons, once you get that transcendent talent, it's so much easier to fill out the rest of the roster. And I was like, just finding this this post I made back in 2016. This is when people were like, they're never going to be able to build a team around these guys. I said, I guarantee you that the Amir Johnsons and Brandon Basses of the world will be happy to take Philly's money when offered. And then within a year, they actually literally signed Amir Johnson to $11 million, and then they signed JJ Redick to $20 million. The point that I was trying to make, it would be really easy for any average GM to take these assets and turn it into a decent team. Like, it would be really hard to fail at this point. They have so many assets and so many guys that have potential to be great. And we saw it with Colangelo, right? He brought in a couple decent guys, and he made some trades that were pretty terrible, but ultimately they still have Embiid and they still have Simmons. With Simmons, the interesting thing about him is, even if he doesn't fit in with Embiid, don't you consider him having like an extremely high trade value?
I think I think the problem with Simmons is, let's say all of a sudden they go right back to the playoffs, right? And he gets exposed by a Boston or a Milwaukee or Toronto. What's that going to do to his value? Our team's going to just be like, okay, he's a regular season guy. He's going to be a stat guy, but he's not. He's a guy that maybe isn't going to take you to that next level when it comes to playoff time.
So let me ask you this then: who says no between this trade? If Philly offers up the Wizards Ben Simmons and the expiring contracts of Muscala and Wilson Chandler for Bradley Beal, which team actually says no to that?
Well, I think honestly, I think both teams would probably do it. It should be in their best interest to do it because Bradley Beal could shoot the ball. And since the Wizards are rebuilding, they could actually put an entire 3-and-D type team around them. Thomas Bryant has actually shown a lot of improvement this year, so there's some potential there. They're stuck with Otto Porter's contract, but then the problem is they're stuck with John Wall. So the only way I would see the Wizards doing that if they could all of a sudden trade Wall too. You can't have Wall and Simmons playing together.
Right. Well, Wall's out this season, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But then, next year.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I think that kind of thing's interesting. So, I mean, again, I was supporting the idea of what Philly was trying to do, and I think they have options now. I think they've blown quite a few options. Like, they obviously traded Noel for crap, and they got crap for Okafor, and then the Fultz thing was just bad. I mean, give credit, I guess, to Hinkie for the fact that they had that pick to begin with, because it was that Kings swap. Their actual pick was 5th, and then they swapped with 3, and then they ended up trading up to number 1. But I guess what I'm saying is, you thought that I was kind of Philly's infallible and anything they do is great. I don't agree with that. I think that Philly has quite a few things they made mistakes on, but I still generally liked what they tried to do, and I think that it still has a chance to end up being very, very good for them. Right now, they're on a pace to 52 wins. Simmons, Embiid, and Butler, whether or not they mesh together, those 3 are still all-star caliber players, and they could end up figuring it out by the end of the season. And then I know it seems crazy, but like, they could just salary dump Fultz on some team that's willing to take a chance on him. I think he's a perfect example of one of those guys that is a second chance guy, right? And if they do that, then they basically have on the contracts for next year, all they have is Embiid and Simmons making about $40 million, which gives them roughly around $60 million to either re-sign Butler and add another guy, or just add 2 other guys. Like, they still have options, and they still have Embiid, who's like awesome. So I think ultimately it worked.
Yeah, but they also have to re-sign Redick to that team. And he's what, 34th, going on 35 right now?
He's definitely a key part of that team. But I mean, again, once you have Embiid, they can build a team around Embiid, and maybe there's all sorts of guys like Kemba Walker, who's a free agent, Chris Middleton's a free agent. Like, maybe they just go in a totally different direction and just surround Embiid with shooters. The whole point of their tank job was trying to get a superstar talent, and they got Embiid, and now they're probably going to be a perpetual 50-plus win team as long as that guy's around, right?
Yeah. But we'll see what happens. I do think that there's some danger in that Butler contract, and aren't they obligated right now to re-sign him? You can't trade Covington and Saric and let Butler leave in free agency. You just can't do it. It's a major hit to the franchise. So the problem is that contract is very dangerous, man. How old is Butler right now? He's turning 30 this year, right?
Yeah, you're right. So he's going to be 30. Yep.
Yeah. And now you're talking about a 4 or 5 year deal for a guy that, I mean, he's pretty athletically reliant. He's not a really good shooter. He's an isolation guy. He even said it himself. That's how he wants to play, and he wants Brown to run more ISO for him. So how does that play in with Embiid, who wants the ball, who wants touches down low, and Simmons, who needs the ball to be effective? You can't have Simmons off the ball. Right. So it's. I mean, if you think about it, wouldn't it be better served to trade Simmons away and have a couple like high quality role players? Let's say even a Simmons for a Drew Holiday and
that's funny. Bring him back, right?
Yeah, bring him back and bring E'Twaun Moore as a shooter, just that's locked in and signed long term. I mean, obviously it's not very appealing on paper, but when you think about it, it kind of like the pieces fit a lot better. Butler could have the ball in his hands more. Holiday is excellent, a 3-and-D guy. I mean, he's one of the best defenders in the NBA. That would be a great trade for them.
I think they have a lot of options. It's going to be interesting for Philly. Honestly, I don't find myself watching them that much this season. I'm a Celtic fan after all. But yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why they wouldn't trade Simmons right now for like I said, like that Bradley Beal trade, because they have the expiring contracts to do it, is because they're keeping the open option of potentially having 4 All-Stars next season. I mean, they would have to get Jimmy Butler to take less, and they would have to basically sign someone for like $30 million on top of that. But I think that's probably what they're trying to do. And I think that's probably why they didn't go out and get someone like George Hill or something that could have helped their team, because they don't want to have any additional salary when one of their options might just be to have Embiid and Simmons and then fill their roster around those guys with their cap space,
Right, but let me ask you this. Who do you think is more important right now this season? Forget about like going forward because of the age. Jimmy Butler or Redick for their team?
There was that recent news with Jimmy Butler coming out and being angry at how he's being used. He's angry at everyone, but he's apparently angry at Coach Brett Brown. But then I was looking at kind of briefly glancing at the Sixers subreddit, and quite a few people there were like, Jimmy Butler's right. He's not being used right now in an appropriate way. And apparently I think maybe that's being made more than it should be. I think Brett Brown.
You don't think that's also the fact that he's new to the team, so fans want it to work, so all of a sudden they're going to give him the pass because he's like the shiny new toy that they got?
Well, don't they deserve a little bit of leeway? I mean, they've played like 22 games with Jimmy Butler at this point. They didn't have a training camp together, and they're still figuring things out.
I do. It would just be awesome if like you're a player and you think the same thing. You're like, you know what? It's only been 22 games. Let me give Brett Brown a chance. Yeah. Let me not just complain. Let me not bash him.
Right.
According to the reports, Embiid saying that he wants touches, and I actually looked at that up yesterday. When Embiid said he wanted more touches, came after a game against Detroit where he sat out and they won.
Yeah. Do you think Brett Brown's actually a good coach?
Stevens destroyed him. See, like I thought he was pretty good against Spoelstra.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because of the talent level was so like disparaging. But man, really destroyed him.
I think he's a super likable guy. I love his accent. He's obviously from Boston. I think he's one of those guys that players probably generally like. But I'm not sure if he's like a master tactician, and I'm not sure if he's the right guy. I think Philly needs like a wartime coach at this point. From their perspective,
right.
I mean, it might be
he's
best.
Like a raw cheerleader type.
Yeah, yeah. And I honestly felt like I know I've gotten some people have been mad at me for saying this, but I thought that Philly had a lot of talent last season, and as well as Tatum and Brown and all of our guys played against them, Philly probably should have won that series, or at least given them more of a fight than they did. Like, we just completely destroyed them, and I wonder how much of that's on the coach, right? So it's going to be interesting to watch them. It's going to be interesting to see how they, what kind of changes they make. Obviously, I don't think this is going to be the same team that we see at the end of the season, much like the Celtics. I think Philly's going to probably figure some things out. I think Boston's going to figure some things out, and they might be the team that we end up playing in the conference finals or maybe the second round of the playoffs, you know?
Right. No, and things, obviously the core is probably going to be the same for both teams, but if you think about it, there's going to be a lot of turnover with our roster.
Definitely. And I think it's probably definitely going to happen with Philly as well. When you look at their roster and you think about the guys they have expiring, I don't know what to expect there. You know, maybe Kevin Durant ends up going and teaming up with Embiid. Like, you don't know. Anything could happen, I guess.
Yeah, the Durant thing was interesting because I was thinking about Dallas as a potential suitor for Durant.
Interesting. Playing with Luka?
Yeah, because with Luka, I mean, he went to Austin for college for his lone season.
Yep.
No state income tax over there.
Sure.
You know, DeAndre Jordan and him are really tight.
Mark Cuban's usually one of the guys that's right in the thick of it. Let me see do they have cap space coming up this season?
Yeah, they're going to have cap space.
Oh, yeah, they're going to have quite a bit, aren't they? Yeah, they could.
And they got Rick Carlisle, who's a great coach.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. I mean, sure. Doncic, the way he's playing is, so spectacular that, and then they have Dennis Smith Jr., who's pretty great as well. They could, I could see that. I could see that being one of the destinations for Durant. I guess it depends on how well Luka keeps playing and what their options.
A starting lineup of Durant, Barnes, who's whatever, but at least he'll give you something.
Yep.
Jordan, Dennis Smith, and Luka, pretty dangerous.
And they have the cap space that they could actually add a couple guys. So that's always an intriguing thing when a team has the potential to pitch to two guys at the same time and say, Kemba Walker or whoever,
I was just thinking about Kemba Walker. Yeah, exactly. Kemba Walker, and Durant, and all of a sudden you trade. Barnes, you attach a pick to him and you trade him to a bottom feeder.
Yep. Or maybe Jimmy Butler, right? Maybe Jimmy Butler will jump ship from Philly and end up going to Dallas with Durant. Who knows? A lot can happen. It's gonna be exciting.
Yeah. No, but that's something that I was thinking about. It seems feasible. I mean, I know a lot of people are thinking New York and whatever, but just the outside of the box thinking, why not Dallas? I think with Dallas, they've shown a lot more this year, at least during the playoff mix. A lot of people thought they were going to be a bottom 5 team. They didn't expect Luka to be this good this early.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. What else you want to talk about, man? Do you want me to defend Biyombo? What do you want to talk about?
Biyombo's actually playing well, man. He's starting to play well. You should be happy.
Well, I think Biyombo was one of those guys where you've given me crap and said that I think he was going to be a star. But to be clear, the reason why I wanted the Celtics to target Biyombo, this was right in the mix of that 2015 draft where a lot of people wanted us to trade up and take Willie Cauley-Stein. And you remember Stein went 6th. And we tried to give up 4 firsts to move up to number 9. So the idea of moving up to 6 would have probably been even more expensive. And my point at the time was Biyombo's stats were very, very similar to what I expected Willie Cauley-Stein to be. And he was available for $3 million a year. I was like, why don't we just sign Biyombo instead of giving up half our assets for Willie Cauley-Stein? I stand by that one. I know Biyombo hasn't been great this season, and he ended up getting a $17 million a year contract. But at the time, it made sense,
I was just giving you shit. Like,
Okay.
honestly, no, that was just one time I was giving you shit. I have no issues with Biyombo as a third big, I don't think he's a rotational piece on a winning team, but he's a third big. I think he was also playing for a contract the year that he was playing really good that you thought we could pick him up. So that's always dangerous. The Mark Blunt.
Yeah. I've just always had like this interest in getting these long defensive centers, and that's kind of why I'm excited about Robert Williams, right? He's kind of that Nerlens Noel, Bismack, Biyombo kind of mold where we hope that he's going to be like the centerpiece of a defense someday. Yeah, I'm happy we have him, right? Now that we have Robert Williams, like someone on Celticsblog the other day was like, it was shocking to see this, but someone was like, should we trade Jaylen Brown for Mo Bamba? Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer brought that up in the offseason when Brown was coming off in a crazy playoff, but I was surprised to see someone bring it up right now. But I don't know if we need that, right? We have Robert Williams now.
But yeah, remember, when it comes like draft time, all these draft picks become really, really valued until they actually start playing. I'm not saying Mo Bamba's bad, but just their stock always, it's like taking a brand new car out of the lot. It always loses value, right? So yeah, I think absolutely. That's how I see it, a draft pick. That all of a sudden, once he starts playing in summer league, and the awards start coming out, and you're like, wait a minute, okay, he's good, but he's not great yet. But he has obviously all the measurements. His measurements are on par with Gobert, but with a 3-point shot.
As soon as those draft picks happen, I mean, at the time, it's like, wow, a #1 pick, and then you end up with someone like Anthony Bennett, and you have a guy like me arguing that trading number 16 for him is a good idea, and people saying I'm insane. So yeah, definitely the value of these guys goes way, way down after they show up and don't quite dominate.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but no, I mean, I do like Bamba. Going back to Williams, though, one of the key things on him is not only his leaping ability, but that second leap that he's got, the second, third, fourth leap. Like, if you remember Rodman, people think that Rodman was just a great rebounder, but a lot had to do with like that second leap that he had. He was just such a quick jumper.
Earlier I was talking about how every champion had like an elite big. I kind of consider Rodman one of the elite bigs on Chicago because of just how, he wasn't necessarily a 7-footer, but that dude could do some crazy things.
Yeah, don't forget Bill Wennington, man. That's
Bill Wennington. They had Horace Grant their first 3.
Right, and then they had Rom in the last 3, right?
They had Bill Cartwright. I was looking at Bill Cartwright because I was just kind of looking. I'm like, oh, I think the Chicago team kind of disproves my theory that every champion has had at least an elite big. But I thought it was interesting. Obviously, Cartwright wasn't an all-star in Chicago, but did you realize that guy was an all-star his rookie season?
New York. Yeah, he was in New York, right? Yeah. You remember what they used to do, the Bulls used to do with Cartwright at the beginning of the game? The first 2 plays with Cartwright because they wanted to make him happy just so he could rebound and defend. You don't remember that?
I was a bit younger. I wasn't quite looking. I was looking at Jordan mostly, but I'll take your word for it.
Oh. Yeah, man. The first 2 plays, they would always run plays like low post plays for Cartwright just to get him like into the game.
That's funny.
Shit, how about us back in the day? We had Artis Gilmore, and Artis Gilmore's numbers were insane his early years.
Oh yeah,
Artis Gilmore was nuts, and then he played on the Celtics. I think 87, 88.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing where I look at these guys who peak in their early years. I think, Bill Hondo was my guest in my last podcast, and he was saying that he worries that Jaylen Brown peaked in his second season. I don't think that's the case, but I guess it's possible. We see these guys ending up being all-stars in their first season and then kind of petering out from there.
Man, if Jaylen Brown has peaked, I'm really disappointed.
I don't think that's the case. I still think that... I think Bill Hondo brought up a good point about his 3-point shooting and how unsustainable it might be, but Brown's still developing. That kid's young, man. He's going to be really good, I think.
But let's go back to form. Like, obviously, I know on like Brown's free throws, to me, it's more in his head, but I do see him like off balance. But if you look at his 3-point shot, his form, it looks good. Like every time he shoots, it looks pretty good. So I think it might just be like a matter of maybe it's in his head or just, obviously he's not getting the consistent minutes or the consistent shots. But I think Brown's gonna be fine. What's Klay Thompson shooting this year? Shooting comes and goes. I know Draymond Green is somewhere in like 22% as well. He's another guy that's not shooting well.
Yeah, Klay's down to 35% from 3 right now, but I'm sure that's going to go back up.
And then also 33.
Brown's last 5 games, he's been really, really good. I mean, the last couple of games, honestly, have been more so than all season, the most relaxed I've been about this team, because Brown is, past 5 games, he's averaging 17 points with 67% shooting, 47% from 3. I'm starting to feel confident this guy's figuring it out. Gordon Hayward obviously just had his 2 best games probably this season. Marcus Smart's posting career highs of 40% shooting with 34% from 3.
Right.
And I'm not worried about Tatum. I think that guy's gonna be fine. And then the other one was Al Horford. His last 3 games, he's been just blazing from 3-point range, and he's up to 36% from 3 for this season. So we have all these guys. I think my only mild concern is that we have so much talent, like you said, that it's going to be hard for guys to get their touches. Do you worry that we need to have some kind of consolidation trade? Or are you pretty comfortable with like our 8-man rotation?
No, I think we're going to be 9 guys. Because off the bench, let's say the starting 5 remains the same, then we're going to have Baines, Hayward, Brown, and Rozier off the bench. But the one that worries me the most is going to be Rozier, because it looks like he's always he's chasing stats, man. He takes a lot of bad shots. So I would love to let's say add a shooter like I touched upon before with Harris. So all of a sudden you let Hayward run the second team offense, and you could have a shooter that doesn't need the ball in his hands, isn't going to take shots, is going to shoot within the flow of the offense like a Harris and create spacing. And I think that would be a better dynamic.
Maybe in a couple weeks, as we approach the trade deadline, I might have a few people on and just kind of get some ideas of some kind of trades they think might be a good idea.
Another guy is Reggie Bullock from Detroit. Reggie Bullock is a good 3-and-D guy. Rozier is a lot better player than Bullock, but do we need Rozier to be Rozier, or do we need Rozier to be Bullock? So if we need Rozier to be Bullock, let's just get Bullock.
Is your ideal starting lineup by the end of the season, do you want it to be Kyrie, Smart, Morris, or do you want us to have Brown and Hayward back in the starting lineup?
No, I want Hayward back. Hayward does so many things well on the court. Like he's gonna make the right play. He's gonna box out. He's gonna make the extra pass. He's gonna drive and dish. He's gonna set up his teammates. He just does a lot of things well. I actually, like I said, like I want the ball to start going as he gets more and more confidence. I think the ball for us to really start excelling is gonna have to be in his hands a lot more, and we could have Kyrie more in like that scorers role, kind of like he was in Cleveland, and take him off the ball. So all of a sudden now he could work with a live dribble. Like he run him off a screen, and now all of a sudden he's got the ball and he could, you know what I mean? He's got options.
He's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out with those guys. Hayward's been really, really good. I'm still having a little bit of patience with him. He said after his 35-point game, he mentioned that he's still experiencing soreness and that he's still rehabbing his ankle. And he's targeting personally, he said like April or May is when he expects to be better, or at least his ankle to feel better than it is right now. So, but I mean, by the end of the season, like that guy, if he can get back to an all-star form consistently, then we're gonna have a chance to go pretty deep.
I remember him also. I don't know if it was in the same interview or not. He also said that his lateral quickness he feels is all the way back.
Right.
He does feel that his leaping ability he still has room for improvement. But I actually see him leaping really well with not in traffic. But I do think in traffic he holds back on jumping as high as he can for obvious reasons.
So that 35-point game he had a couple, the second Minnesota game, it was a lot more encouraging than the first one, because I felt like the first one he just kind of hit a lot of open shots, but the second one he was attacking the basket a lot more, leaping a bit more. So I
actually thought he was more impressive against Dallas because he was scoring on all 3 levels, man. He was really, really good in those mid-range like fadeaways. Really, really good, and that was like the same Gordon Hayward we used to see in Utah. That's where he would like control the ball and make a play either for himself or others, and then like he was taking advantage of a switch. Another thing that I did notice, most of the time you would see him, even though he had a mismatch, he would want to screen and roll. Yesterday he had mismatches and he was attacking. Like he had DeAndre Jordan on a switch who could move his feet, and he was willing to go at him. So those are positive signs that you could see that his mind is getting back to, and he realizes like he's becoming the player that he was and needs to be for us to like excel.
Yep. So, I agree. I agree with Eddie20.
Oh wow.
Look at us agreeing on everything. Yeah, man, this team, they're starting to look good. We just need to start meshing a little bit more. I mean, once Kyrie gets back into the lineup, but individually it seems like everyone's starting to figure it out, and that's pretty exciting.
Right.
All right, man. So we've gone pretty long. Thanks for giving me all your time.
No, man, thanks. It was fun.
Hopefully, any hate you had for me, we kind of solved some of that.
No, man, it's gone. I actually look. Truth be told, I actually did think you were a Philly fan, but things changed. Like after listening to your first pod with Scott. Yeah, and I'm like, hey, this guy's just, it's like probably like that fantasy basketball, like building a roster type. And I think that's why you were appreciative of the Sixers, but it has nothing to do really with being a fan of them. Just more of like seeing the roster building and take place.
Yeah, I'm glad, man. If my podcast could get you and I to heal our wounds, then it was worth doing. you and maybe two other people listened to it, but hey, man, it was worth it.
No, we're definitely good, man. We're definitely good.
Well, thanks for chatting with me, man. Let's keep in touch, and maybe we can do this again some other time.
For sure, brother. Go Celtics, right?
Go Sixers, Celtics. Yeah. All right, man. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
All right, bye. All right, so that was Eddie20. We ended up going pretty long. I think a lot longer than we expected. But look, I can't undersell how much the two of us were at each other's throats for the past several years. It really did get pretty contentious. He really did seem to hate me. The only guy that might have hated me more is this fella that used to go by the name of Fuck You Larbird33 on Reddit. It's kind of subtle, but I think that he didn't particularly like me. Actually, I probably should have asked Eddie if that was his username on Reddit. But anyways, it doesn't matter. It was great to bury the hatchet with him. I probably should have done it a long time ago. So hey, as I was listening, I realized that we had a little bit of technical difficulties. I was recording this and I kind of kept hearing a persistent popping sound on Eddie's line. So I'm really sorry. I want to apologize to both Eddie for messing up his audio, but also to anyone who actually suffered through this whole podcast and found that popping distracting. If anyone actually did manage to make it through the whole thing, the whole marathon podcast, I feel like I owe you. So I was watching this YouTube video the other day of this YouTuber who was apologizing to his many subscribers and offered them up Amazon gift card codes. But like, look, that guy had millions of followers, and I've got like 10, and I don't get a dime from this stuff. So the best I can offer up is this sweet Royce White autographed card to the first listener who makes it all the way to this point, subscribes to my channel, and leaves a comment with the hashtag "Give me that shitty card." All right, thanks for listening. If you actually want me to do more of these, please like and subscribe. Bye.